sending them off. This gets a little weird because he sent them off to his upstate college, upstate New York college, that where they would perform like an acupuncture brain surgery on them so that it would eliminate their criminal ways and stuff. So they'd be rejuvenated and could come back into society as an upstanding member. So that's a little because it's forcing change on people. I'm not sure I agree with that now, but as a kid, it was great.
Well, how would you categorize Doc Savage? Is it a science fiction?
Pulp adventure. It kind of with touches of science fiction, because if you compare it to like The Shadow from the era, The Shadow was more mysticism and magic and dealt with things like that, whereas Doc Savage was all by the end of the adventure, everything was explained. Everything had. It may not have been scientifically plausible, or it was plausible, not necessarily factual. So everything worked out. There was always some answer to how these weird things were happening and stuff. So that was the difference, and between The Shadow and Doc Savage. But The Shadow was a precursor for Batman, and Doc Savage was in a lot of ways a precursor for Superman. So you had Superman was the Man of Steel. He had a fortress of solitude above the Arctic Circle. He had a female cousin that would join him on adventures as Supergirl. All these kind of things. And 6 years before Superman ever showed up, Doc Savage was the Man of Bronze. He had a fortress of solitude above the Arctic Circle. He had a cousin, Patricia, who went on lots of adventures with him as well. And so there were lots of similarities in that sense. So just like you can say The Shadow was the early Batman or the precursor, same thing with Superman.
So was this one of the attractions? I mean, the fact that Doc Savage was had this genealogical link to comic books, as well as it was foretelling the future that we were living.
Partially, yeah. And partially it was just the fun of reading them and stuff. The books were written by mostly by Lester Dent. There's like 182, I think, in the original series. Most of them were written by Lester Dent, but not all of them. All under the house name of Kenneth Robeson. I've read them all, and they're pulp. They're all just formulaic, very, the same thing over and over and over, constantly. And from there, then I started getting into, like Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, Frank Herbert,
classics, yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke, yeah, and got into all this kind of stuff with science fiction, and Ray Bradbury is one of my favorites. And
I loved reading him growing up, man. Illustrated Man, all the stories.
Dandelion Wine and Martian Chronicles, and
fantastic.
Fahrenheit 451. It's brilliant stuff. I actually got to meet him once, and that
really?
was absolutely thrilling.
What was that like?
He was here at the university sometime back in the 80s.
Oh, shit.
I was just like in awe. I had him, sign a collection of his short stories, because his novels are wonderful, but I think he really masters the short stories.
Absolutely.
He really is tremendous at that. And one of the things he said, which has always stuck with me, is what is the point of having a library of books you've already read? And that was like, because if you've already read them, where's the new knowledge? So collect books and read them as you go. And who cares if you've got tons of books you haven't read yet? You'll get to them eventually. So.
Did you learn anything about the craft of writing, meeting Bradbury?
Just the love of it, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting was that he said he's never worked a day in his life, and this is a man who's been writing and publishing since he was, 14, 15, 16, something like that. And for him to say he's never worked a day in his life, well, he works every day on his writing. But his attitude is he loves it. It's something he enjoys. It's a hobby. It's not work. And the fact that he can make money off of it is wonderful. And I really, that, was a wonderful way of looking at it too, is, do what you love. And if you find something that you love, stick with it, and hopefully someday it'll pay off for you. So.
I remember a photographer talking on TV one time. He said, "I can't believe I'm getting paid for this.
Yeah,
I love this shit, man."
Yeah, that's got to be a wonderful feeling to get to a point where you've got that much talent, that you can make your way doing stuff. So from Ray Bradbury, then I discovered Stephen King, who's another one of my favorites. And
what do you think is King's his best novels?
Well, I think there's a lot of them that I really, really like. My favorite Stephen King book is actually The Dark Tower of the Gunslinger, the first volume in that series. And one of the reasons that I like it so much is the very first sentence encapsulates the entire book, and in essence encapsulates the entire series. And that is, the man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. And that right there is really the entire book of The Gunslinger, and almost entirely the entire series of The Dark Tower. So I mean, it's a brilliant opening line, to be able to come up with that. So.
How is Dark Tower different from other Stephen King novels?
Well, it's fantasy more than horror, and it actually incorporates. It brings all of his other previous work together, almost creating like a universe in and of itself. There's a character from Salem's Lot who's a minister who, they're hunting down vampires and stuff, and at some point in the book he kind of heads off and you don't really see him anymore, and this minister shows up in the Dark Tower in book 5, I think 5 is when he shows up, might be 4, and becomes a fairly major character from, in I think 5 and 6 or something, from a couple books there, which was really interesting, because if you've read Salem's Lot back when it came out, in the 70s, and then 30 years later, 40 years later, you get another book, and it's like, wow, that's
so cool. Because I remember Albert Camus, his book The Plague. There's a reference in that novel about, it's like I think a pharmaceutical. Anyways, there's an office shop, and this guy is talking about a book about a guy who after his mother died, killed a guy, and went to jail. And of course, that's a plot to The Stranger. It's a self-referential plot.
Yeah. And Stephen King has done that, before. In fact, in the 7th book, he actually appeared. Or was it the 6th book? One of the either 6th or the 7th. He shows up as a character.
Really?
Book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of
for a metafictional thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. But what he did is he pulled in the auto accident where he had been hit while he had been walking on the road.
Okay.
He pulled all that into the story itself, and it was really fascinating, because also to have a writer have the opportunity to kind of work through something like that he's been through was interesting too. So from Stephen King, I fell in love with the modern concepts of horror and vampires and such like that, and from that I discovered S.P. Somtow, who is from Thailand, was educated in England, and
really, what's the connection?
Well, what between England and Thailand?
No, between King and
Somtow.
Somtow, yeah.
He wrote a book that was called, or is called, Vampire Junction, which is about a vampire who is about 2,000 years old. He became a vampire when he was like 12 years old in ancient Rome, and at the time he was a castrati, so he has never aged from that point. And in the modern time, he has created a identity for himself as Timmy Valentine, who's a pop rock star. And one of his signatures is the fact that he holds notes for an impossibly long period of time. Well, since he doesn't breathe as a vampire, he can do that. These little things were some of the interesting stuff that I thought Somtow was grasping. But he, since he was born in Thailand, educated in England, lived in America, and had a fascination with Native American mythology, these weird elements of things come together in his books that are in weird, strange mixes that you would not, just impossible to try and describe or predict. So, but he wrote like 3 books on the character Timmy Valentine, and he's written children's books, he's written semi-autobiographical stuff, science fiction, just straight up fantasy, all kinds of stuff. And his degree was in music.
Well, that's why he was able to do operas.
He got commissioned by the King of Thailand to do the Thai operas. So, he's a brilliant man. That's somebody who I would love to meet.
Sounds like a Renaissance guy.
Yeah, has to be. I mean, he's brilliant. While he was writing